Title of this module is race. What is race? Race, the idea that the human species is divided into distinct groups on the basis of inherited physical and behavioral differences. Genetic studies in the late 20th century refuted the existence of biogenetically distinct races, and scholars now argue that races are cultural intervention reflecting specific attitudes and beliefs that were imposed on different populations in the wake of Eastern European conquest beginning in 15th century. Ma-identify talaga natin pag ang isang tao is magkaiba yung race nila. Like sa atin mga Asian, ma-identify mo talaga sa mga physical attributes nila. Like sa Asian is pag makikita ka ng mga singkit, uy, Asian na yun. Mostly we stereotype ano uh, Central Asian people like China, Japanese, and Korea. We stereotype them as one, like we, para dahil singkit sila, tatawagin natin sila ng uy, Chinese ka ba, ganun ganun. Pero magkaiba sila ng mga nation or states. Pero yun talaga yung mga stereotypes natin sa kanila. At yun sa mga Caucasian naman, makakita na tayo ng mga ganun is tatawagin sila afam. Tatawagin sila afam or sa ano pa ba? Or marami tayong mga tinatawag sa kanila dahil alam naman natin kung ano yung mga distinction nila sa ibang tao compared sa atin. What role do you think race plays in international relation? Race is not a perspective on international relations. It is a central organizing feature of world politics, and today race shapes treat perception and response to violent extremism inside and outside the war on terror. Yet mainstream international relations scholarship denies race as essential to understanding the world to the cause of the field integrity. Take the big three IR realism, liberalism, and constructivism. These dominant claims for understanding global politics are built on race and racist intellectual foundation that limits the field ability to answer important questions about international security and organization. Like sa pag-report kanina ni Kuya Pang na if makakita tayo ng mga Muslim, we stereotype them as a terrorist. Ganun talaga yun. Dahil, dahil, dahil sa mga binabalita ng mga Western countries about their culture, about their we deem them as an terrorist, and we start to uh, masarap tayong matakot sa kanila kahit hindi naman sila talaga mga terorista. So, next. In 1925, William Edward Bourgat de Bois argued that World War I traced its origin to competition between white Europeans for black African labor. So si William Edward Bourgat de Bois he is an African American writer, a teacher and sociologist and activist whose work transformed the way that the lives of black citizens were seen in American society. So he is an advocate of black internationalism, and he is known for Beauty in Black. Tension between democracy for metropolis and repression for colonial territories. What is race? An ordering principle. Skin color, biological distinction, social contracts. As for skin color labels were not a neutral description but connoted, meaning that influence the perception of described groups. As for biological distinction or scientific racism, sometimes term biological racism is the pseudo-scientific belief that empirical evidence exists to support or justify racism, racial inferiority, racial superiority. Historically, scientific racism received evidence throughout the scientific community, but it is no longer considered scientific. And as for social construct, it is an idea that has been created and accepted by the society. So, hierarchical education of human competencies through the categorizing of group attributes, wherein groups are delineated by some kind of shared heritage that is deemed visually identifiable. Like I said before, pag makita tayo mga singkit, kahit hindi naman sila talaga Chinese or Japanese, ay kahit hindi naman talaga sila Chinese, matatawag na pa rin natin silang, uy, Chinese ka ba? Ganon. At pag makakita naman tayo ng mga Muslim or Islam, we identify them as terrorists. We stereotype, uh, lalo pag mga Pinoy, mahilig talaga mag-stereotype. Oh. So, European system built on dispossessing natives, exploitation and dehumanization of African, South Asian, and Asian peoples. These dispossessing natives are the process of removing the natives from their ancestral lands lead to their disputes. As we have read in history, like yung pagpunta ng mga British sa Amerika, uh, pinapaalis nila yung mga natives sa lugar nila mismo. Kahit hindi naman sila talaga yung mag-aari sa lugar. Kaya hanggang ngayon, meron pa ding mga small conflicts na may nangyayari na mga discrimination about the natives because even though they are the true owner of the land, but now the uh, colonies are the one who are using their land. As for exploitation or demonization of African, South Asian, or South Asian people, uh, as uh, as we as we explain what is exploitation, it means exploitation is yung ginagamit ka lang ng uh, ginagamit or ginatreat mo yung mga tao na unfairly in order to benefit from their work or making use or benefiting from them, or just like for example South Asian people, ginagamit nila yung mga South Asian people para lang makakuha sila ng mga low wages na mga na labors. As for African, they exploit them, uh, uh, as making them making them look bad. Just like recently, we have cases in America that they're killing the black people, and uh, nagsastart na yung mga ano yung mga protest against that, like Black Lives Matter, white man's burden. Colonialism legitimated as a civilizing mission, bringing enlightenment to benighted people. As far as we know in history here in Philippines, when Spain or Spain, they when they colonized the Philippines, yun talagang ang gusto lang nila, at first gusto lang nila is to enlighten people, but as they enlighten people, they started colonizing them, uh, as we explained, eventually Europeans decided colonized people could not be civilized, thus would always be subordinated to Europeans. Oh, kaya ah, kaya yung nangyari noon, ginagawa nila tayong ignorante, ah, dahil akala nila hindi tayo masi-civilize or at wala tayong civilization noon. So they force us to be civilized. Ah, so they occupy our land para lang ma ano, para ma-legitimate lang yung pagbibigay nila ng enlightenment sa mga tao.
A mandate system after World War One can be understood as a continuation of this ideology. So mandate is authorization granted by the League of Nations to a member nation to govern a former German or Turkish colony. The territory was called Mandate Territory or Mandate. The following defeat of German in Ottoman Turkey in the World War One, their ASEAN African populations, which were judged not yet ready to govern themselves, were distributed among the victorious Allied powers um, under the authority of the League of Nations. So, mandate system was a compromise between allies wish to retain former German and Turkish colonies. So their armistice and declaration. Post World War One, a number of racial ideologies developed and came into circulation. First is scientific racism. So scientific racism, sometimes termed is biological racism, is the pseudo-scientific belief that em- empirical evidence exists to support or justify racism. Racial inferiority, racial superiority, and historically, scientific racism receive credence throughout the scientific community, but it is no longer considered scientific. The second is eugenics. Eugenics is a scientifically erroneous and immoral theory of racial improvement in plant breeding, which gained its popularity during the early early 20th century. Eugenicists worldwide believed that they could perfect human being and eliminate cold social ills through genetics and heredity. Would compromise part of legitimating ideology of Nazism. So if we say Nazism is justify the mass murder of people whom they uh, uh, deem as a racial inferior. So next is
An example of this Nazism is, do you remember that news that when an 18-year-old teenager killed a few black men because he thinks that killing black people is normal, and because they are naturally inferior. uh, this ideology starts when civil war in America, because they think black people are still slave, and until today they still teaching their students that black people are inferior race.
so yung sa example niyo is yung um, about yun sa Nazism. So marami ding tayong nakikita sa panahon natin, no, yung kagaya ng sinabi ni Gio. Next is apartheid. So apartheid is a policy that govern relations between South Africa's white minority minority and non-white majority for much of the later half of the 20th century, or sanctioning racial segregation and political and economic discrimination against non-whites. So ito yung yung nangyari no, sa alam naman natin yung um, inequality ng white tsaka black. So um, pag pag sinabi nating white is yung yung mga Americans is talaga sila yung yung nakakataas. Then pag sinabi nating African American is nasa sila yung nasa pinakamababa. So yung sinabi ni Gio kanina um yung exploitation, yun yung yung ginagawa nung dati. So dahil doon merong mga discriminations no against non-white, yung yung dahil sa apartheid mismo. Race is an organizing principle in international relations, is not dead. Example is Anglosphere. So ibig sabihin ng Anglosphere is a group of English-speaking nations that shares common ancestral, historical, and cultural ties with England or the United Kingdom broadly, which today maintain close political and diplomatic military cooperation. Next is Five Eyes. So the Five Eyes is an intelligence alliance comprising Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and United Kingdom, and the United States. These countries are parties to the multilateral UKUSA agreement, or a trade for joint cooperation of signals intelligence, which is called Five Eyes. Global War on Terror. So Jean Charles de Minicis was shot dead by the London police in 2005. Minicis, a Brazilian man, reside in a block of flats that police believe that suspected suicide bomber were using. Police followed Minicis as the left of building. Officers later claimed that they were satisfied that Minicis was one of the suspect of bombers due to Mongolian eyes. As Minicis boarded a train Stockwell tube station, armed officers shoot him at close range. Minicis, an innocent Brazilian, had been racialized by the police into Muslim terrorist and was consequently shot dead. So, ito yung yung isang example na um yung pag about sa racism no. Kasi pag sinabi na pag black ka no sa example sa Amerika, pag black ka is meron kang intention na parang masama ka na no. So yun yung yung one thing na disadvantage pag merong inferiority sa isang bansa mismo. So yun lang yung namin yung report no about sa uh, gender, nationalism, and race. So thank you.